The first thing Grace Ballard noticed when she entered Yardley Enterprises was the smell of money. Not literally, of course, but there was something about the gleaming marble floors, the perfect lighting, and the hushed voices that screamed wealth in a way her modest catering business rarely encountered. Clutching her portfolio of sample menus, she took a steadying breath and approached the receptionist. "Grace Ballard from Graceful Gatherings. I have an appointment with Miss Peterson about catering the board meeting." The receptionist's smile was practiced. "Of course. 18th floor, Miss Peterson is expecting you." As the elevator climbed, Grace mentally rehearsed her pitch. After 5 years of building her catering business from scratch, landing a contract with Yardley Enterprises, one of the city's most prestigious shipping and logistics companies, could be the break she needed to expand beyond local events and small corporate functions. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area where a stern-looking woman in her 50s was waiting. "Miss Ballard, Elaine Peterson, executive assistant to Mr. Yardley. Thank you for coming on such short notice." Grace extended her hand. "Thank you for considering my company. Our usual caterer had a family emergency, and your name came highly recommended by Westlake Properties. I've reviewed your website, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on handling a board meeting for 15 executives." Grace followed Miss Peterson down a hallway lined with photographs of cargo ships and distribution centers. "I specialize in creating memorable dining experiences, even for business functions. My approach focuses on elegant simplicity with unexpected touches." Miss Peterson nodded, leading her into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "The meeting is next Thursday. Mr. Yardley expects excellence, particularly with the London partners attending." "I understand completely," Grace replied, opening her portfolio to show sample menus. "I'd recommend starting with these breakfast options," followed by the door swung open, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Elaine, where are the projections for the Singapore expansion?" The man who entered didn't look up from his phone, his deep voice filling the room. "On your desk, Mr. Yardley. I'm just meeting with Miss Ballard about catering the board meeting." When he finally looked up, Grace found herself staring into the most intense blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man was tall, with broad shoulders filling out his expertly tailored suit. His dark hair was cut short, with just a touch of silver at the temples that gave him a distinguished appearance despite being in what she guessed was his early 40s. "Ah, yes. The catering." His eyes scanned her briefly, then moved to the portfolio. "I trust you're finding everything you need." Grace straightened her posture. "Yes, Mr. Yardley, I was just explaining my approach to corporate events." "Good." He seemed ready to leave but paused, glancing at her portfolio. "What's that?" She followed his gaze to a photograph of one of her signature dishes. "Seared scallops with pea puree and pancetta crumbs." Something changed in his expression, a flicker of genuine interest. "You make that?" "I do. It's one of my specialties." He reached for the portfolio, flipping through it with careful attention that surprised her. "These all look remarkably good. Thank you. Do you have formal culinary training?" Le Cordon Bleu, followed by 5 years working under Chef Martin before starting my own business. His eyebrow raised slightly. "Impressive. Well, I'll leave you to it." He handed the portfolio back, his fingers brushing hers momentarily. "Elaine, I'll need you in my office in 10 minutes. After he left, Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Don't mind Mr. Yardley," Miss Peterson said, noticing her reaction. "He's just very focused on the expansion right now." "Of course," Grace replied, returning to her presentation while trying to ignore the lingering impression of those blue eyes. By the end of the meeting, she had secured the contract. As she rode the elevator down, Grace couldn't help smiling. This was exactly the opportunity she needed, even if the intimidating CEO had momentarily thrown her off balance. The day of the board meeting arrived with Grace, and her small team of 3 arriving at 5:30 a.m. to set up. The company kitchen was state-of-the-art, making her work easier as she prepared the breakfast spread. Perfect timing, she murmured as she put the finishing touches on the pastry display just as Miss Peterson entered. Everything looks wonderful, Miss Ballard. Please call me Grace. Very well, Grace. The executives will begin arriving in 30 minutes. Mr. Yardley is already here and would like a coffee brought to his office black with 1 sugar. Grace nodded. I'll take it to him personally. She found his office at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. After a gentle knock, she heard a distracted come in. Yardley Blake was standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his back to her. Even from behind, his presence dominated the room. I don't care what their concerns are, Jeremy. The environmental impact report is clear. We're exceeding regulatory requirements by 20%. He turned as she entered, nodding acknowledgement. Find a way to make them comfortable or find someone else who can. I need to go. He ended the call and accepted the coffee. Thank you, Miss Ballard. You're welcome. Breakfast will be ready when your executives arrive. He took a sip and looked genuinely surprised. This is excellent coffee. Single origin Ethiopian beans. I bring my own for special events. A detail person, he observed. I appreciate that. It's the little things that make the difference. He smiled for the first time, a transformation that softened his features and crinkled the corners of those striking eyes. A philosophy I share. An unexpected moment of connection hung between them before he glanced at his watch. I should review my notes before everyone arrives. Of course. I'll let you work. Throughout the morning, Grace moved efficiently between the kitchen and the boardroom, ensuring everything was perfect. When she brought in the mid-morning refreshments, she couldn't help noticing Yardley Mr. Blake. She reminded herself, watching her with curiosity as she arranged everything. The meeting ran into lunch, which she had prepared with particular care. As the executives filed out for a brief break, Yardley approached her. Miss Ballard, I must say this is the best catering we've ever had for a board meeting. Thank you, that's quite a compliment. The London partners were particularly impressed with the lunch. What was that dessert? Vanilla bean panna cotta with blackberry compote and almond tuile. He nodded appreciatively. You've created quite an impression today. That's always my goal. Would you have a moment after the meeting concludes? I'd like to discuss potential future events. Of course. The afternoon session finished earlier than expected, and by 5 o'clock, Grace was supervising her team's cleanup when Miss Peterson informed her that Mr. Blake was ready to see her in his office. She found him reviewing documents, jacket now off and sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He gestured for her to take a seat. Miss Ballard, your service today exceeded expectations. I'm pleased to hear that. We have several events coming up: a client appreciation dinner next month and our annual company holiday party in December. I'd like to discuss retaining your services for both. Grace's heart raced. These were exactly the kind of higher-profile events she needed. I'd be delighted to work with you again. Excellent. There's also a more immediate matter. He hesitated. This is somewhat unusual, but I'm hosting a small dinner at my home this Saturday. 6 people, including myself. My usual private chef is unavailable, and after today's experience, I wondered if you might be available. The request surprised her. Private home cooking wasn't her typical service, but for the CEO of Yardley Enterprises. I believe I could arrange that. What kind of dinner did you have in mind? Something similar to today's, sophisticated but not pretentious. It's a combination of friends and 2 potential investors. I'd like to impress without appearing to try too hard. He named a figure for her services that was nearly double her usual rate. I can certainly help with that, she said, trying to hide her excitement. Would you prefer I present menu options, or would you like me to surprise you? A hint of that transformative smile appeared. After today, I trust your judgment. Surprise me. They spent the next 15 minutes discussing logistics, dietary restrictions, and timing. As she rose to leave, he walked her to the door. I appreciate you accommodating this request on short notice. It's my pleasure, Mr. Blake. Please call me Yardley. Then you must call me Grace. That smile again. Grace it is. I'll see you Saturday. As she gathered her belongings and left the building, Grace couldn't believe her luck. Not only had she impressed one of the city's most prominent business leaders, but she had secured future corporate events and a private dinner. Her business might finally be reaching the next level. There was also something unexpected in the way Yardley Blake had looked at her, particularly when discussing food. For someone so seemingly focused on business, his appreciation for her culinary creations had felt genuine and personal. Saturday arrived with Grace arriving at the address. Yardley had provided a sleek penthouse in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Armed with groceries and equipment, she rode the private elevator up and was greeted by Yardley himself, dressed in casual but clearly expensive dark jeans and a light blue button-down that made his eyes even more striking. "Grace, welcome. Let me help you with those." He took 2 of her bags and led her into a kitchen that would make most professional chefs envious. "This is quite a space," she said, admiring the marble countertops and top-of-the-line appliances. "I rarely have time to use it properly." He set down the bags. "Can I get you anything before you start?" "I'm fine, thanks. The guests are arriving at 7? "Yes. Make yourself at home in the kitchen. I'll be in my office if you need anything." True to her word, Grace created a menu designed to impress without being showy. She started with delicate crab cakes with lemon aioli, followed by a refreshing citrus salad. The main course was her signature herb-crusted rack of lamb with rosemary potatoes and roasted seasonal vegetables. For dessert, she prepared individual dark chocolate soufflés with raspberry coulis. As she worked, Yardley occasionally passed through, asking thoughtful questions about her techniques and ingredients. There was something different about him in this setting, more relaxed, genuinely curious. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked as she prepared the lamb. "My grandmother started it. She was from southern France and believed food was the center of everything important in life." Grace smiled at the memory. "Then formal training built on that foundation, but honestly, I think cooking is something you feel more than learn. Like business," he mused. "You can study it, but the most successful people have an instinct for it." "Exactly." She was surprised by the parallel. The dinner was a success. From her position in the kitchen, Grace could hear the appreciative murmurs as each course was served. When she brought out the soufflés, perfectly risen and timed, the entire table applauded. "Our compliments to the chef," said one of the guests, a distinguished older gentleman. "Grace, would you join us for a moment?" Yardley asked, surprising her. She wiped her hands on a towel and stepped into the dining room. "Everyone, this is Grace Ballard, the culinary genius behind tonight's meal." He introduced his guests, 2 married couples and a single man who, she gathered, were the potential investors. "This was extraordinary," said one of the women. "Do you have a restaurant?" "No, I run a catering business, Graceful Gatherings." "Well, you should. This rivals any restaurant meal I've had in the city." Yardley watched her with something like pride, though that seemed odd given their brief acquaintance. Grace also catered our board meeting Thursday with equal success. After answering several questions about her background and business, Grace excused herself to begin cleanup. The guests departed an hour later, leaving Yardley to return to the kitchen where she was finishing up. "That was exceptional," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Let me help." "You don't need to do that." "I insist." He took a dish towel and began drying the hand-washed stemware. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "My guests were thoroughly impressed. I believe we secured both investments, and I'm certain your food played a role. Happy to help. You mentioned your grandmother earlier. Is your family from France?" "My grandmother was. She moved here after falling in love with my grandfather, who was stationed there after the war. A romance story, the best kind. They were married 57 years. Impressive. My parents made it to 30 before my father passed. I'm sorry to hear that." He shrugged slightly. "It was some time ago. They had a good marriage, though nothing quite so romantic as your grandparents." As they finished cleaning, their conversation flowed easily from family to travel to favorite foods. By the time Grace packed her remaining equipment, it was nearly midnight. "I've kept you too late," Yardley said. "Let me call you a car." "That's not necessary, I drove here." "Then at least let me walk you down." At her car, he thanked her again. "I hope we can work together again soon, Grace." "I'd like that." Their eyes held a moment longer than necessary before she got into her car. As she drove home, Grace found herself replaying their conversations. There had been moments when Yardley Blake seemed like an entirely different person from the intimidating CEO she'd first met. Warmer, more thoughtful, genuinely interested in her work and her story. The following Monday, Grace was preparing for a small luncheon when her phone rang. Grace. "Yardley Blake, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all. How are you?" "Well, thank you. I wanted to let you know that both investors committed this morning." "That's wonderful news. Congratulations." "It is. And as I said, your dinner played a significant role." He paused. "I was calling for another reason as well. The client appreciation dinner next month. I'd like to meet to discuss the menu in more detail. Perhaps over lunch." The invitation caught her off guard. "Lunch? Yes, I find food discussions are better had over food, don't you?" She smiled. "That makes sense." "Excellent. Are you free tomorrow?" They arranged to meet at a well-known restaurant downtown. After hanging up, Grace tried to convince herself this was purely professional, yet something in his tone had suggested otherwise. The restaurant he'd chosen was upscale but unpretentious, known for its innovative take on classic dishes. Yardley was already seated when she arrived, rising to greet her. "Grace, thank you for making time." "Thank you for the invitation." Once seated, he surprised her by saying, "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of asking the chef to prepare some special items for us to try." "He's an old friend." "Not at all. I'm always excited to try another chef's creations." What followed was a parade of small, exquisite dishes, each introducing flavors and techniques that clearly demonstrated the chef's skill. Throughout the meal, they discussed not only the upcoming client dinner, but also food philosophy, business challenges, and personal tastes. "May I ask you something personal?" Yardley said as they shared a deconstructed tiramisu. "Of course." "Why catering? With your talent, you could have pursued a restaurant or become a private chef to someone wealthy." She considered the question. "I love the variety. Each event is different, each client unique. And I like the personal connection, being part of people's important moments, even in a background role." She shrugged. "A restaurant ties you to one location, one concept. This way I can constantly evolve." He nodded thoughtfully. "That makes perfect sense. It's about freedom and creativity." "Exactly. What about you?" "Shipping and logistics doesn't seem like a passion career," he laughed. "No, it's not what children dream of becoming. But I find the global connectivity fascinating, how goods move around the world, the infrastructure that makes modern life possible. It's complex and constantly changing. So we both like variety and complexity." "It appears we do." When the check came, he insisted on paying. "This was my invitation. Next time can be on Yardley Enterprises account." "Next time?" His eyes met hers. "I hope there will be many next times, Grace. I've enjoyed talking with you." The lunch led to dinner a week later, ostensibly to finalize the client appreciation event menu, but evolving into something that felt increasingly like a date. Yardley asked about her dreams for her business, listened intently to her answers, and shared more about his own journey from business school to taking over the family company after his father's death. "It wasn't my plan to step in so soon," he admitted. "I was 32 and still learning the ropes in our European division when he had his heart attack. Suddenly, I was responsible for 3,000 employees and a company in the middle of expansion. That must have been overwhelming. Terrifying is more accurate, but you adapt." He took a sip of wine. "What about you? Was starting your own business frightening?" "Absolutely. I had savings for 6 months of expenses and no guarantee of clients. The first year I took any job I could get just to keep the lights on. And now I'm fortunate enough to be selective. To create food I'm proud of for clients who appreciate it." Like me? His smile was warm. Yes, like you. By the time Yardley drove her home that night, the pretense of professional consultation had completely faded. Standing at her door, he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I've really enjoyed tonight, Grace. So have I. I'd like to see you again, not to discuss catering or business, just because I want to spend time with you. The directness was refreshing. I'd like that too. Good. He leaned down and kissed her cheek softly. I'll call you tomorrow. True to his word, he called the next day to invite her to a weekend art exhibition. Over the next few weeks, they saw each other regularly: dinners, a jazz concert, a walk through the botanical gardens. Each date revealed more about the man behind the CEO facade. She learned he had a dry sense of humor, a passion for architecture, and a surprising knowledge of poetry. He discovered her love of old films, her competitive streak when they tried bowling, and her ability to identify wine regions by taste. After a month of dating, Grace catered the client appreciation dinner, creating an elegant multi-course meal that earned rave reviews. Watching her work, Yardley seemed as proud as if he'd prepared the meal himself. Later that night, as they sat on his balcony overlooking the city lights, he took her hand. I have a confession to make. What's that? When I asked you to cater my home dinner, it wasn't just because my chef was unavailable. She raised an eyebrow. No, I was intrigued by you from our first meeting. The way you talked about food, your confidence, your attention to detail. He smiled. I wanted an excuse to see you outside the office. So you manipulated circumstances to get me into your home, she teased. When you put it that way, it sounds calculating. It was calculating, he laughed, maybe a little, but with good intentions. His expression grew more serious. I've dated before, Grace, but I've never met anyone who makes me feel the way you do. You're passionate about your work, but you're not defined by it. You're ambitious but kind, and you make the best damn scallops I've ever tasted, she laughed. Is that why you're with me? The scallops? Among other reasons. He leaned in and kissed her, not on the cheek this time, but a real kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. When they separated, she smiled. For the record, I was intrigued by you too, even when you were being the intimidating CEO. Was I that bad? Terrifying. But in an interesting way. As their relationship deepened, Grace found herself falling in love with Yardley. Behind his business persona was a thoughtful, caring man who supported her ambitions and shared her values. He introduced her to his friends, asked her advice on matters both personal and professional, and never made her feel like her career was less important than his. 6 months after their first meeting, Yardley asked Grace to cater a special event at his penthouse. What's the occasion? She asked. It's a surprise, just 6 people like the first time. Any special requests? Recreate that first dinner, everything exactly the same. The request seemed odd, but she agreed. When she arrived to prepare, something felt different. The penthouse was filled with flowers, and Yardley seemed nervous, a state she'd rarely seen him in. As she prepared the meal, he kept finding reasons to come into the kitchen, checking on progress, asking unnecessary questions. When she finally asked what was going on, he simply kissed her forehead and said, "You'll see." When it was time for the guests to arrive, she was surprised when only 4 people showed up, 2 couples who were close friends of Yardley's. I thought there would be 6 people, she said as she served the crab cakes. There are, Yardley replied. You and me make 6. Before she could question this further, he insisted she join them at the table rather than serving from the kitchen. Throughout dinner, their friends shared stories of how they'd watched Yardley transform over the past 6 months, more balanced, happier, less consumed by work. He talks about you constantly, said one of the women. It's always Grace thinks this or Grace says that. Yardley looked slightly embarrassed but didn't deny it. When you find someone special, they tend to influence your thinking. As Grace brought out the soufflés, everyone grew quiet. She placed one before each person and finally sat down with her own. Aren't you going to try it? Yardley asked when she hesitated. She picked up her spoon and broke through the delicate crust. Something glinted inside something that definitely wasn't raspberry coulis. Her breath caught as she carefully extracted a stunning diamond ring from the dessert. Yardley moved to kneel beside her chair. "Grace, when you walked into my office that first day, I had no idea you would become so important to me. You've brought joy, balance, and incredible food into my life." His smile was tender. "I can't imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Of course, yes." Their friends applauded as Yardley slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her. Later, after their friends had left and they were cleaning up together a routine they'd established early in their relationship, Grace asked, "How did you get the ring into the soufflé without me noticing?" "I have my ways," he said mysteriously, then laughed. "Actually, I had the pastry chef from Le Méridien smuggle it in while you were preparing the main course. Professional courtesy among chefs. Sneaky, strategic," he corrected, pulling her close, "and worth it for the look on your face." They were married 6 months later, in a ceremony that combined elegance and warmth, much like Grace's cooking. She didn't cater her own wedding, of course, but she did collaborate with the chef on a menu that told their story through food, including those scallops that had first caught Yardley's attention. As they began their life together, Grace's business continued to thrive. With Yardley's encouragement, she expanded Graceful Gatherings to include a line of gourmet products and a cookbook. Yardley remained CEO of his company, but found a better balance between work and personal life. 3 years after their first meeting, they welcomed twin daughters, Sophia and Olivia, who quickly demonstrated they had inherited their mother's appreciation for food and their father's determination. One evening, as they put the girls to bed after a family dinner, Yardley wrapped his arms around Grace. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting, if your name hadn't been recommended when our usual caterer canceled?" "I prefer to think it was meant to be," she said, leaning against him. "Some connections are just inevitable, like food and love, exactly like food and love." She turned in his arms to kiss him. "Both essential, both best when shared, and both improved with care and attention." "And both things you excel at," he murmured against her lips. Years later, when asked how they met, Yardley would always say it was the best business decision he ever made, hiring a caterer who ended up capturing his heart along with his palate. And Grace would smile, remembering that first intimidating meeting, never having expected that the serious CEO would become the love of her life and father of her children. Their story became a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected ingredients create the most perfect recipe in cooking and in love.